So one of the things that's really interesting about pure mathematics research is that you're on very shaky ground the entire time. So you have a whole web of conjectures which you use to navigate. So conjectures are things which we don't yet know are true. And so if you imagine that we're trying to navigate through a landscape, we have various conjectures about how the landscape is located and which passes are passable, etc. And basically what our field was governed by a central conjecture, which was called the Lusztig Conjecture, which had been around since 1979. And I'd spent an enormous amount of time trying to establish, so trying to show that it's correct. And there was a lot of progress in the 90s, which led to an understanding that this conjecture is true most of the time. But still, exactly when it was true was not known. And what I discovered in the shower in Beijing was a way of producing consistent kind of counterexamples to this expectation. So basically the world as we'd conceived it was fundamentally different to what we had hoped.
And the analogy that you've used regularly in interviews is the idea of mapping, I believe. So when you're working on a conjecture, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's an area over here on the map that is not appropriately mapped, but we have some fair idea as to what is going on there.
Exactly.
And it takes an individual to go and actually map it. And actually, it would be like in the 1700s or 1600s, someone goes on the Eastern Australian coast and they know the general shape, but no one has actually mapped out the depth of the sea floor and where the actual shape of the coastline looks. I actually can't remember the term. What do they do when they navigate the coasts and sort of map it out? Anyway, that's what I'm thinking of every time that people start talking about this area. Do you think that's the best way of thinking about it?
Yeah, I think it's a great way of thinking about it. And what the Beijing discovery was basically the discovery of a whole lot of very dangerous reefs.
Yes. Okay.
That we'd expected a nice kind of shipping channel, and there's a whole lot of reefs there that were totally unexpected.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think the most interesting part about that was the state you had to be in to find it. I'm really, really interested in flow states. I've mentioned in the past, being a good thinker, being creative is important to being a good mathematician. You seem to have these daily and weekly processes of meditating, diarizing, intense periods of work, hobbies that are unrelated to your field of work, like rock climbing. But there's also this element of collaboration. So you've worked with some really interesting people, Ben Elias, I think Wolfgang Sergel, is that how you pronounce his name?
Mm-hmm.
Sergel or Shergel? Zergel. And there was a mathematician in China whose name I couldn't quite catch in a previous interview. But he was the one that really pushed you at the time, I think, during that conference, right?
Yeah, that was very interesting. So I'd started to suspect that these reefs were there. And it was one of those situations where you suddenly realize you've thought that you're surrounded by open water, and then suddenly it occurs to you, maybe there's reefs everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do one test, then you can find perhaps a reef or perhaps not.
Okay.
But I couldn't work out a way of doing this test. And I was visiting a mathematician in Hong Kong, Xu Ha He, and basically he was forcing me to explain the entire subject to him. It was basically 9 to 5. I was in his office, standing at the board. He was asking me questions. He's a superb mathematician. He thinks very differently to me, so he was pushing me to think in a different way. And then this one went on for about 8 days, and then we had about 2 days where we were actually collaborating, and we found this nice formula. And then, 3 days later in Beijing, I flew to Beijing, and I think that night, or a few days later, I had the breakthrough.
Did he have knowledge in this area of representation theory? Had he been studying and researching in this area?
He was close enough. I often find with collaboration, you can be too close where you both have the same ideas, or you can be too far away and then you can't communicate, or you can't meaningly or deeply communicate. And we were just the right distance apart, I would say.